Kappa, Omicron, Rho. It means the chief Koruphe of what?
Right, the chief of what?
Of Apostolon, the apostles.
The apostles. Chief
Of the apostles.
Peter.
What if I told you that hidden for centuries beneath layers of earth near the Sea of Galilee, a church has been discovered, and inside it, an ancient message carved in Mosaic stone might just upend centuries of theological debate? This isn't in some obscure archive or far-flung corner of the world. It's right where Christianity began, right where Jesus once walked. And the message? It boldly proclaims Peter not just as a follower of Jesus, but as the leader of all apostles, the man entrusted with the keys to heaven itself. This isn't just another artifact. It's a thunderous whisper from the past, one that could shift how we understand the very roots of the church. Before we dive into this mind-blowing discovery, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. If you love deep stories, spiritual mysteries, and discoveries that bring faith to life, you'll want to stay connected. Now, let's explore the ancient find that may rewrite what we thought we knew about Peter, Jesus, and the early church. This isn't your typical archaeological dig. This is a revelation. On the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, an area already drenched in biblical history, a team of archaeologists, led by Professor Mordecai Avium and Dr. Stephen Notley, began digging beneath the earth, hoping to uncover traces of ancient Christian life. What they found was far beyond their expectations. They unearthed the remains of a long-lost Byzantine church, believed to be built over the ruins of a much older settlement. But what truly stunned the researchers wasn't just the structure, it was the inscription. Embedded in the floor of the church, an intricate Greek mosaic proclaimed Peter not merely as an apostle, but as the chief of the apostles, and more shockingly, as the man holding the keys to the kingdom of heaven. This statement echoes Jesus' words in Matthew 16:19. "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." The text was incredibly well preserved, almost as if time had protected it on purpose. The letters were clear, the wording precise. It was a theological statement chiseled in stone, and it had been waiting quietly for 1,500 years to be seen again. To understand why this matters so deeply, we need to look at the mystery surrounding the town of Bethsaida. In the Bible, Bethsaida is named multiple times as the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. It's the backdrop to some of Jesus' most iconic miracles, including the healing of the blind man and the feeding of the 5,000. Yet, for centuries, scholars couldn't agree on where it was. Some thought it was the site of Et-Tel, nearly 2 kilometers from the Sea of Galilee, but something didn't add up. It was too far from the water to have been a fishing village, and strangely, lacked Roman-era remains. For a place that was supposed to be bustling during the time of Jesus, Et-Tel seemed strangely silent. Then, after the 1967 Six-Day War, another site began to attract attention: El Araj. This low-lying area, much closer to the lake, began to yield ancient pottery, coins, glassware, and eventually evidence of Roman life dating all the way back to the 1st century. By 2016, a full excavation began, and by 2018, what they had uncovered was extraordinary: the remains of a Byzantine basilica with signs of earlier Roman habitation beneath it. The pieces were finally coming together. It was in the center of this basilica that the most astonishing find appeared: a mosaic bearing an inscription in ancient Greek. But this wasn't a generic dedication. It named Peter as chief of the apostles and holder of the keys of the heavenly kingdom. It also included a prayer for someone named Constantine, not the emperor, but likely a local patron who had commissioned the Mosaic. This is critical. The language wasn't vague or poetic. It was deliberate, ecclesiastical, and deeply theological. 8p, it mirrored the words Jesus spoke to Peter, but it did so not from Rome, not from a later political church era, but from the heart of Galilee, from the very land Peter once walked, from a time before church schisms, before doctrinal divides. It's a snapshot of what the early Christians actually believed. And here's where things get even more compelling. Back in 725 AD, a Bavarian bishop named Willibald recorded his pilgrimage to the Holy Land. In his writings, he described staying in a church at Bethsaida, a church dedicated to Peter and Andrew. For years, modern scholars dismissed his account as legend or pious storytelling. But now, the archaeological evidence lines up with Willibald's description, the layout of the church, its dedication to Peter, its proximity to the water. It all matches. A medieval traveler once thought to be dreaming turns out to have been telling the truth. His words are no longer just folklore, they are now eyewitness evidence. What the archaeologists found beneath the soil was not just one church, it was a layered story. A Roman fishing village, then a Byzantine complex with bathhouses, guest rooms, and sacred halls. It was built with purpose, to honor and preserve memory. And that memory, we now see, centered on Peter. In those early centuries, Christians didn't choose church sites randomly. They built over places of memory, over places where faith had been born and lives had been changed. Just as the Church of the Nativity stands in Bethlehem or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, this church at El Araj appears to have been intentionally raised over the home of apostles. And in doing so, they left a breadcrumb trail of belief, buried under mud, but never lost. It's one thing to find a church, but to find this church with this inscription in this location, that's different. It confirms more than just geography. It confirms tradition. It suggests that early believers, centuries before modern denominational divisions, saw Peter as more than a disciple. They saw him as a leader, divinely chosen, holding the keys to the kingdom. And here's what's profound. This statement of Peter's authority didn't come from Rome. It came from Galilee, written in Greek. Long before East and West divided, long before theological controversies were born, which means Peter's role wasn't a later invention. It was already embedded in the hearts and minds of those closest to the origins of the faith. The fact that this title appears here, in the land of his birth, carved into the very floor of a church built by those who still remembered, is stunning. It tells us the early Christians didn't see Peter as one among equals. They saw him as the one entrusted by Christ to lead. Of course, not all Christian traditions agree on Peter's role. Some point to Matthew 18:18, where Jesus gives similar authority to all the apostles. And yes, that's part of the story. But in that passage, there are no keys. Keys are different. In the ancient world, keys represented power, access, stewardship, the ability to act on behalf of a king. And in Isaiah 22, verse 22, we see that symbolism used to describe dynastic authority. When Jesus gave Peter the keys, he was doing more than honoring him. He was appointing him. And now, 1,500 years later, in a place untouched by political bias or theological agendas, that belief has been rediscovered in stone. This mosaic is more than an archaeological find. It's a silent witness, a testimony from the early church, unfiltered, unedited, and immovable. It tells us what those Christians believed before the centuries brought councils, controversies, and denominational divides. It tells us that, in Galilee, Peter was honored not just as a follower, but as the foundation. He was the man with the keys. And the early church never forgot that. Now, neither should we. So here we are, standing once again on the shores of Galilee, staring into the uncovered bones of faith. The church at El Araj isn't just a pile of ruins. It's a living reminder of belief, memory, and divine calling. It confirms that Bethsaida wasn't just a name in the Bible. It was real. It had people, life, faith. And perhaps most important of all, it had Peter. Thanks for joining me in this exploration. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to the wonders hidden beneath the soil of history, don't forget to like, comment, and share. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Stay curious, stay faithful, because sometimes the oldest stones carry the newest messages.